I know you have beaten speeding tickets because I have been with you. This is not legal advice, right?
I'm not saying do 90. I'm not saying I was doing 90 that day or ever do. One of the cartels going to figure out you just got to look like a college game day crew coming through, right? And then they can pull as much weight as they want on 10.
Hey, this is Chaz Roberts. I'm a personal injury lawyer. It's my passion to bring the law to the people, and that's the purpose of this podcast. You're listening to Law Have Mercy.
Dude, do you want to spice up?
You are listening to Law Have Mercy. Now, back in the podcast, the man, the myth, the legend, the guy who went viral on TikTok and didn't even know it, Benny Benazesh. Hey, Benny.
On TikTok is a relative term because you were on TikTok. I was on your TikTok, but I'm not even on TikTok.
Well, being that at the end of the episode, whenever people ask you, how can we get in touch with you? You said, hey, just call Chaz and he'll find me.
It's happened multiple times since then, so it's working for me.
Just make sure you brings a nice dozen of donuts to my staff so they can show you appreciation for redirecting to your office.
Get you some of them. I'll get y'all some of those fancy cookies.
Benny has so many kids that he has to buy the tailgate packs when he goes to Raising Cane's.
I don't have to. It's just faster, more convenient, and it breaks down to less price per chicken.
and they're not real big to the slaw.
50, by the way. They can knock out most of a 50. A 25 is not enough anymore.
That's okay.
It's a house full of men that just so happen to not be able to feed themselves yet, basically.
So I'm excited to bring you back on because one is you're always a lot of fun, and two, we had so many comments from TikTok on some of the advice that you gave, and I want you to have an opportunity to address some of that.
Okay.
But we're gonna address that down the road. What I want to know is, what have you been up to?
Oh, just worked, man. I mean,
you got any cool cases?
I got a really cool one that I
guess cool is a relative term, right?
One that I think is going to be very, very interesting, and one day hopefully we can come back and we could do a whole breakdown of it post trial. Right?
It's going to trial.
I think it's going to go to trial, and it's probably maybe we'd have to do this next year, but that's my top of mind one. And then I guess you got a bunch of the same stuff. I don't like talking too much about active cases just because there's certain details that somebody might be able to recognize what I'm talking about, even if I don't mention anybody. You know what I mean?
Isn't it always strange when you see those defense attorneys that have press conferences while cases are pending? I never know where the line is on that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, that's probably something in certain cases where you should have some contractual language as a lawyer with your client. So that's all laid out. But I've never commented on anything with the calls I've got, but if the client would want me to, I would, and I think probably in a lot of cases, that's a very important angle. Like, you're trying the case in the media before you're ever in a trial.
Do you think it's to touch the jurors in an indirect way? Or
even just to negate what's being put out by the state in each of these cases? First thing anybody reads about a crime is the news report that comes from the police. Now, if there was a comparison of the news report and the eventual facts proven in the case, a lot of times there's some disparity there, okay? Great disparity in some cases, like the one I was just thinking about, okay? This was a newsworthy case, So it's part of why I can't talk about details of cases. The locations, the fact patterns, the things, you don't have to name specific victims in a town like this for people to figure out where they are. But, we could talk about some old cases, stuff that's closed out, and just circumstantial stuff, give fact patterns that way.
I'm just fascinated with lawyers that try the case in public opinion. One that comes to mind is the one in Baton Rouge with the guys that were accused of rape and murder of the young lady that was hit by a car after a night out of drinking. And it seemed like the defense lawyers took the offensive on that.
Well, that's a good example of where if the narrative is being controlled by the prosecutors and there's video evidence like there was in that case, that makes a big difference in people's minds, and everybody's already thinking and talking about the case, well, what do you have to lose of putting the video out there? That's going to be in evidence. It's something that clearly happened. You know, it's the truth, right? You're putting truth out there to help your client. You know, of course, you obviously do that.
And in a way, you're still representing your client, and not necessarily in court, but you're representing your client to the public.
That's correct. I mean, it's advocacy outside of court, but it matters, and it matters a lot, I think, in terms of a lot of pretrial things like fixing bond, you know, and may even get the entire case dealt with, you know, if you can sway public opinion, right? I know that, and I didn't follow that very closely, but I know there was a video that basically showed the girl getting in the car with the boys, and that's, you know, I think that probably makes a lot of difference to a lot of people, you know. One voluntary act tends to indicate the next act being voluntary, right? I don't know that it's dispositive, but it's
certainly
contextually
different.
important.
It's certainly different than had she not gone in the car in her own volition.
Followed him to get in the car, right? That, you know, like kind of chased after him. You know, that was clearly her intention was to go with them, you know. So if anybody was thinking that it started with a kidnapping or something and they based their conclusions off that, well, that video blew that up, you know. But I didn't follow the storylines and stuff that close on that. A lot of attorneys sometimes will take some of these high-profile cases for the press conference, too. You think about it, right? So there's some guys that get free representation maybe because they have a high-profile case, and the understanding is the lawyer is going to make it as high-profile as possible, right? And that's the understanding, you know. It may not always benefit the client, you know.
Have you ever considered that as an angle for some press?
Yes, I got a call about a documentary, and the type of cases they were looking for fit at least a half dozen cases I had that I thought would be compelling, okay? And so, what my conversations with the clients would basically be that, you know, we only do that if we believe that that's going to be helpful in your defense, right? Like, you know, if it was me sitting in the chair of the accused, I'm not looking to get famous on my way to life in prison. You know, I'd rather be anonymous at home, right? Like, who cares about the TV show? Because, you know, but if a client were to think that that might help, and it may under certain circumstances help, especially, again, if it's one of those situations where there are items in evidence that they speak for themselves, right? And it's unquestionable what they show. And if they don't fit with the narrative that's been told or with the narrative the state intends to show a jury, you know, having that there, even if it's not being broadcast to the public actively in advance of trial, to me, it's a little bit of an extra check on the state, right? Where they might want to be careful how they operate under a particular case if they feel like it's being scrutinized by a national television crew, right? We've already had some national TV crews here for certain cases, nothing I was been involved in, you know, but some of the DAs were on CBS. You know, I think it was CBS, Dateline, on a local case, you know, so.
You know, what's interesting, I guess the difference between what I do, personal injury, and what you do in criminal defense is that my client always tells their story. Your client has to tell their story through you questioning other people, right? Most criminal defendants never testify.
Sure, that's the advice, and hopefully before they've talked to me, they haven't told their story to police. You know, some of them never even given the opportunity. But you know, usually it doesn't benefit the accused if they're speaking to the police, particularly after they've already got like an arrest warrant or something like that.
Did you follow the Murdaugh trials?
No. You
familiar with Alex Murdaugh, the lawyer?
This is the lawyer in South Carolina?
Yeah.
I remember
stole a bunch of money from his clients.
Early news reports and just reading them and thinking something does not make any sense about this whole deal. Okay, and then obviously he had some maybe substance abuse issues, maybe gambling issues. I don't know, and
stole from his clients millions of dollars.
Well, it was when he got shot, like a week or two after his family got killed.
Correct.
That it was like, wait a second, man.
He paid someone to shoot him.
Try to make him look like a victim of an ongoing thing that actually he created.
He testified in his own trial, and it did not help him. Wow. Now, I think that was the only shot he had. You probably
you probably had a bit of a megalomaniac. This guy, he organized a hit on his wife and kids for insurance proceeds to cover his stolen funds from lawyers, is what you're telling me? Basically,
he was convicted of killing them, not organizing a hit. He was actually convicted of
he pulled
physically killing.
But his motive was to get insurance proceeds?
That seems to be what the scheme was before. Now, either that or they knew too much. One of the two.
About him stealing money from clients?
Yes. And there was a substance abuse issue wrapped into that. But they also had a housekeeper that died on the property, and it was he collected the insurance for the housekeeper, and she tumbled over because some dogs knocked her over or whatnot.
Wow. How big was that payout?
Millions.
In excess of $4 million.
There you go.
And I believe the part of the impetus for the murder of his son was his son had gotten into a boat wreck.
Oh,
which
yeah.
then
I forgot
caused
about the boat wreck.
the family of the person who got injured in that boat wreck to want to sue the kid, and now the dad, because it was their boat and they allowed him to do all the things and get drunk underage. Wow. And so that digging into his financial situation caused...
He was worried about the scrutiny.
So, well, if the son is no longer alive, then that case goes away.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
So what kind of megalomaniac you dealing with here, right? How do we clean up a pending potential civil suit arising from my, what's that terminology, statutory liability?
Wait, it gets better.
The parent's liability. I forget.
It gets better now. That
I'm going to just off my own son, like I did my housekeeper, who I had $4 million insurance on. Take my wife out with it because she won't agree to me doing it to my son. If I kill my son, she'll tell about the housekeeper. Whew.
Wait. So he filed a notice of alibi, right? I guess you have to file a notice of an alibi that he was at his mother's home checking on his elderly mother. A damn Snapchat video got him.
Wow.
There was a Snapchat video that his son had posted to someone, and it put him at the same location as them.
Wow.
At the same general time.
There you go.
So then he changed his story.
Snapchat doesn't just disappear, right?
No, man.
Sarah can tell you about that. It's always there.
It's always there.
Wow. And so you think about a guy like this, he figures he's got it all figured out, right? And just a little detail like that. Because probably the alibi, if there's no way to destroy it, elderly mom, she may not know either way. Yeah, he was there,
She couldn't. I think she was.
Right.
I think they actually said that she had dementia. So
well, there
he
you
probably
go.
chose that alibi for a reason.
Perfect. So, he's thinking four-dimensionally, and, it's just that type of personality who's doing all that wicked stuff. If you tell a dude he shouldn't testify, you think he's going to listen to you, right?
So another thing, for even being a lawyer, his jailhouse calls were used against him.
How does he not know that? I don't know what kind of law he practiced, but how do you not know that?
I mean, I'm assuming
it tells you, man, it tells you when you're signing up for all this stuff, right? We're listening to this. You click the box, right? Yeah, y'all can use all this against me in my trial. Now let me talk about how guilty I am. And code, people talking code.
Well, he was talking. That's so smart of you to say that, because he was talking in code. You really need to go to the deer feeder. How the deer are running this time. The dove. Dad, I don't dove hunt. You really need to go dove hunting.
Right. How many racks did you see today on those bucks out there? How many racks did we collect today on bucks? Okay, I had one. Okay, I'll give you an example. And this guy was not stupid. He was smart, okay? And he's one that came from a background where he did not have to go into the criminal life. He chose it. I remember talking to his mother, and she said, "Sir, I've got 5 kids, and all 4 of them they're military, they're college graduates, they're professionals, they're corporate, whatever, okay? He chose this. He made good grades, right? He just got caught up in the allure, I guess, of, being a badass, being a gangster. He's on the phone. He had run from the cops. And in the process of that, apparently he had dumped his gun, successfully so. And then when they arrested him, they didn't have the gun. They couldn't find the gun. He gets on the phone. He tells his whoever to go look for that roid under this particular set of steps. Okay, well, the police who's listening to the call go and find the gun, right? And then they try to charge him with the gun. So that gun's gone. That's a $50 street gun. Why would you get on the phone?
Cost of doing business.
To tell them where it's at. Like, that's a throwaway, right? Why? I'd never understood that, except that he believed that his code words were enough to, I guess,
throw off the scent.
And it wasn't, like these, you got to understand, these guys, an element of every police department is literally working undercover on the streets, okay? So they're sort of keeping up with things in terms of lingo and who's who and all that, So if the person listening doesn't know what all this means, there's somebody they can talk to figure out what does all this mean, right?
I think when
it's just don't talk on the jail phone.
Well,
you know?
I think people underestimate how smart the cops are and how much they know. I remember when we were looking into I-10 cases with large shipments of drugs.
Oh, yeah.
And we had an opportunity to talk to police that do that for a living.
I-10 drug interdiction, it's the biggest corridor it was then, for sure. It may still be biggest drug interdiction corridor anywhere in the country.
Dude,
okay?
They could see the problematic vehicles a mile away.
I think a lot of times they're operating off of information as well, right? So I know what vehicle I'm pulling over. I know about what time they're coming through. I get an alert from somebody up the road when they see them, and I just got to find a reason to stop them before we leave Jefferson Davis Parish or St. Martin Parish.
You're not fooling anybody with that rental.
That's
car.
Right. Yeah. I liked how so Kia Souls, I think it is, like they'll point to a particular rental as almost they'll use it in their probable cause stuff, or put in their report that particular rental is known to have all these cavities and stuff, and like so the drug runners love these vehicles, right? So they look to rent these. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the extent to which they're sort of compiling their investigatory file on all activity, much less just one individual. And they'll put as much of that in there as they can to, basically get a warrant when they need it, But roadside, they don't really need a warrant. They just need a dog.
So I have a confession. So after I got into those cases, right, and I learned a lot about what those cops look for, I caught myself speeding on I-10. And my wife is with me, and she says, slow down, you're going 80 miles an hour, and the speed limit's 70. And I turn and I say, don't worry, babe. They're not looking for us.
Right. They're not looking for guys going to the LSU game Saturday morning. No. And they can see those too. Coming from Houston, they know who's coming from Houston.
Louisiana plate, LSU Tiger plate, F-150.
Yeah.
Nice.
The Suburban.
They're not
the cliche.
with the flags flying.
That's right.
What are they gonna use those 3 units parked in the middle of the interstate for to stop me and give me a $240 ticket? That's right. That's not worth their time.
In fact, they want to put up cameras so they don't even have to bother with it anymore. Just put up the cameras to do all that, when are the cartels going to figure out you just got to look like a college game day crew coming through, right? And then they can pull as much weight as they want on I-10. Just make sure LSU's playing in the Baton Rouge that Saturday.
I've been stopped and have avoided a speeding ticket on my way to Baton Rouge, particularly near the Port Allen Bridge. Have you ever... I know you have beaten speeding tickets because I have been with you when we've avoided speeding ticket. One time... I don't know if you remember this. You and I had the bright idea to drive to maybe Destin or the Orange Beach or something. We're going.
I thought we were
some type of spring
the
break.
condo in Destin with Vince.
Maybe so. And we were driving, and we spent some time in the back of a truck too. I don't remember. I don't know what the details are a little blurry, but cop stops us. You and I are there, and then I remember you asking him, what did you get on the radar? And he said, I didn't have my radar on, but I was going 85 and you passed me like I was stopped. You remember this at all?
I do remember it now. Because so here's my thing. My personal driving philosophy is speeding does not pay, okay? Because you just it's hard to save any real time by speeding, and most of the time when people speed, they tailgate, and then it's hard on your vehicle, and you don't save no time. Okay, the difference is when you're driving 6 hours on I-10. If you do 90, you actually save quite a bit of time. Now, my thinking is,
this is not legal advice, right?
Right. Well, I'm not saying do 90. I'm not saying I was doing 90 that day or ever do. But what I mean is the math changes a little bit, and from my personal preference on interstate driving, and we could have a whole conversation about my pet peeves about people driving. The single most important factor is to not be around other cars on the interstate. That's what I want to do. When I'm driving by myself or with my family, I want to be around no cars. Most people think, well, that never happens. In fact, I do it all the time because I'll go, if everybody wants to cluster and I can't get through, I'll do 60 and I'll let y'all have it, okay? And I'm going to find me some space back there where I got 100 yards ahead, 100 yards behind. Leave me alone. I don't want to drive next to you. I don't know you. Why are we clustering together on the interstate? We're going 70 miles an hour. We're looking
Wolfpack.
at our phones, okay? And we want to drive with somebody right there. And then, God forbid, you're following somebody who's doing 72 for 15 miles. And I'm coming up, and maybe I'm doing 78, or maybe I'm doing 100. And I'm coming up. And then when you see me coming in that left lane, which is meant for me to pass your slow ass, you go ahead and decide, now's the moment. I want to pass this guy who's doing 72 that I've been following forever. Now I'm going to go ahead. All right, so I got to slow down. And then I got to wait for you to do this pass at 73 or 72 and a half. And it's going to take you a mile to pass one car where I was going to just, and I was done with y'all. And I'm in my next gap, you see? And that's how I like to drive in space. And that's why now if I go great distance, I prefer to drive at night if I'm not flying. Because at night, I mean, I've done Texas east to west on I-10 in sub 12 hours, okay? Now, you do the math on that, okay? All right, but it's at night. There's nobody on the road. In Texas, in some places, they basically figure, if you want to go faster than this, take your chances with the deer and the hills and everything else, you know? And, you know, so, but if you are stopped for speeding, okay, usually most places do have a threshold where if you're 20 over the limit, that makes a big difference. In some places, I think here, they can technically impound your car maybe over 25. I don't know the exact line, but there's a line at which they can impound your car, all right? And it creates mandatory appearance, so you got to go to court, right? You can't just pay your fine or whatever. In my experience with speeding tickets, the most important, or any traffic violation.
let's assume that it's not 20, 25 miles an hour over. If you were stopped for speeding for 10 miles per hour over, what would you do?
Okay, the most recent time that I was stopped, I was bringing kids to school, and there's an officer in my town, and he's there all the time, and I know he's there, right? And they built this big, overpass 3-lane, so it's easier to go fast in certain road settings without realizing how fast you're going. He pulls me over, and basically I just, I didn't admit, but I said, man, I'm sorry if I was over. I know better. I was just explaining to my kid the reason it's important to leave the house on time, and because we got to drive way over here for school every day. Just kind of, and he looked at it, he went back, he checked my record, and he said, look, I know you're coming through here, I see you go through all the time, not speed, and just watch it, I'm here all day. So, and he let me go, all right? And I think it helped that I'm in his hometown, right? He's a hometown officer. I think he's right. He probably sees me there all the time because I drive through it, and I don't generally speed through there. And I think probably because I had a clean record, right? He figures, I'm 40 years old, I don't have nothing on my record, and I'm not a habitual problem driver, and he just cut me a break. I was being nice to him, he was being nice to me. I'm not lawyering up, I'm just being courteous. He's doing his job, and I'm apologetic for having sped on his road without admitting to speeding on his road, basically. Sometimes you're not going to convince the officer, right? I got one in Natchitoches some years back going to a baseball tournament, and I was well over him, and I tried the same kind of thing, and it didn't have really any effect on him. Okay, so, but that's step one of maybe getting out of an infraction, right, is not having the infraction written in the first place. And then step two is, you'll get a court date. You'll usually get a contact point, and, you just make sure you take care of stuff either before or on the court date. As long as you're showing up, you're okay. Sometimes if you show up and it's set for trial and there's no officer there, your ticket might get thrown out. Sometimes they may offer you an opportunity to do something that's not a moving violation. Most people understand that a speeding ticket or running a stop sign or a light, they're going to affect your driving record, which means they affect your insurance rates. I think they also potentially affect the likelihood an officer will give you a ticket again in the future. All right, so I think it's very important to keep your driving record clear, and then, final option, if there's nothing else available for you, is you can take a traffic ticket to trial. You have a right to take it to trial, and the state would have to produce the officer, and the officer would basically have to testify to the facts sufficient to convict you. And so there's a lot of process in there that you can usually use to figure out something other than basically having to pay a speeding fine,
And so we do have to weigh the cost benefit of going through that process and fighting the ticket.
Sure.
And so if you're in Louisiana and you get a ticket in some other state, you may not want to go make the appearance.
That's right.
But in that situation, what you could do is call the DA's office
Yep.
and see if they have some type of traffic class or some type of pretrial diversion program where you
Correct.
can pay, take a class, get some education, and it get moved to a non-moving violation. I have taken advantage of that program in Foley, Alabama. Huge speed trap right between the Buc-ee's and Orange Beach, if you've ever driven that way. They do monitor.
Going next week, so
They
heads up.
follow the speed limit.
Yeah.
Trust me. And you've been going you've probably going 85 miles an hour all the way there to the exit. So that big open
If
highway.
there's nobody in 100 yards ahead or 100 yards behind, it's hard to gauge a reference. Is all I'm saying. When you pass, it's obvious, but
But look, you redeemed
Driving
yourself because you say, look, I'm just trying to avoid people. So sometimes I actually go less than the speed limit to avoid people. Look, you don't want, I can tell you this, from the personal injury side, you don't want to be driving on the side of an 18-wheeler.
No, man, a blowout. Here's the thing. If he has a rear tire blowout, even if he's the best dang driver ever got behind the wheel of a big rig, depending on his load, he's going to have some sway back there, okay? Now, if you're next to the rear axle of an 18-wheeler has a blowout and it sideswipes the front end of your car, are you prepared to handle that? If you see, there's a lot of infrastructure adding on I-10, the cable barriers, okay? That's all recent. If you get sent across at 75, if you get sent into grass, all right, you basically have no more traction at that point, okay? So now you're sort of just marbling through the median, which is fairly wide and someplace fairly deep, and maybe it stops you. But you come out on that other side, it's worst case scenario in an automobile. It's head on interstate, and
there could be sudden construction issues.
Yeah, that's right.
That come up that require some kind of
very narrow lanes.
Narrow lanes, narrow turns.
Yeah, you want to choose between the concrete barrier that's whipping by at 75 or the 18-wheeler who's basically drifted into your lane because the angle of the road makes it to where they almost couldn't avoid it. The better thing to do is just not drive next to 18-wheelers. Just when you pass them, pass them. They don't want people driving next to them. You know what I mean? Think about the extra focus when you drive in this thing because you got this car that just wants to be right next to your rear axle in your blind spot all day long, Like, just go on. Like, come on, man.
Come on through.
You got 400 horses under the hood of that thing. Just give it a little bit. Just a little bit, and then you're gone. You know what I mean? Hey, he's got to shift gears, you know what I mean? He's weighing, his rig weighs tens of thousands of pounds. You see what I mean? Like, you're whipping around in something that weighs 4,000. Like, just get out the way, Bad for business, though, I
want to shift gears. I'm gonna just move on from that comment. I'm gonna shift gears. So I posted a lot of clips from our first interview, and the people love you, Benny. Most people love you. A couple people have had an issue with some of the things you've said.
Okay.
Now, I have defended some of the things you've said.
Okay.
And some I'm going to allow you to defend. So the clip is basically me asking you what to do if you've been stopped after having a couple drinks, okay? And you basically say, don't admit to anything, don't do the field sobriety test, don't blow.
Sure.
Okay, don't admit to drinking.
You don't have to say where you're coming from. Don't admit to drinking. You don't have to do field sobriety. And if you blow, that's used against you if you're over,
Correct.
So you should not blow.
Well, the TikTok comments, YouTube comments have come hard. Scott, do you have any queued up for us?
I do.
I'll give you a chance to respond to them.
We had more than a few people that wanted to point out the fact that if you refuse to blow, that you will automatically lose your license.
Okay.
So it seems like they take that as, well, you're going to get that penalty either way, so why bother refusing to blow?
That's typically the position of the officer arresting you, too. So it's a reasonable question. I thought we touched on it. It's basically the implied consent law. What our state at least says is that if the officer has evidence you were operating a vehicle on a public roadway and he has reason to believe that you were under the influence of alcohol and you refuse to submit to a breath sample, or you submit to a breath sample and blow over the limit, then you're going to have a automatic license suspension, okay? The difference is the 90-day suspension is if you blow versus the suspension if you refuse is a full year, okay?
So what they're saying is
You should just blow to avoid the full year suspension and take your 90 days.
Yeah, you should just
Right.
blow to take.
That's what the ATAC officer
90
tells you too. Right? And so the reason that is
That's a throwaway comment, but that's an important point, what you're saying. That's the advice of the cop.
That's
on
the
scene,
advice
too.
of the alcohol-trained investigative officer who's there to arrest you. Just blow so you don't have a year suspension, right? And the implied consent law is structured that way to induce or incentivize people to blow. And so if you know you have not had any drinks and you don't have any mouth alcohol, you don't have anything else to set off the machine, which if they do the observation period, that shouldn't happen, by all means, blow and go home, you know? But know that sometimes people blow under and they still get arrested, all right? And specifically as it relates to the implied consent law, understand that your 90 days is you're blowing and submitting versus refusing. That's the license suspension under revised statute 32-667. That's separate from your criminal offense. It's totally separate. It's a different process, and it's not related to your criminal penalty, okay? So you have, yes, this extra 9 months, okay? But what they're not telling you is if you go to court after you served your 90-day suspension, when you did your hardship, which means you had your interlock and you had your SR22 insurance at $400 a month, then you get all that taken out of your car and you go to court and they say, okay, sir, you blew a .081. Now we find you guilty of OWI. Guess what? You got 9 more months of suspension to serve, okay? Because that's what the statute says. Also, if you blew a .161 or greater, well, the penalties for your crime are greater than they would have been either if you'd blown at .08 to .16 or if you had refused. So you have significantly more community service. You have a much higher requirement, in some courts at least, related to your substance abuse component that is necessary to place you on probation.
2 days of jail.
You have 2 days of jail, okay? So the excess penalty on the crime of OWI based on a breath alcohol sample greater than double the limit, right, is a big problem for you if you blow and blow over. The risk there more than outweighs any benefit you get on a license suspension, in the sense that what I'm telling you is if you blow .08 or greater and that gets in court, that is a legislative definition of impairment. It's not a question whether you're impaired at .08. You know, you might be able to walk a tightrope, okay, 15,000 feet in the air with no wire at .08. They don't care because the legislature said that's impairment. And so you blow and provide that, and that is the evidence of your guilt that they'll use to convict you. Same as field sobriety. The field sobriety is designed to provide the officer the probable cause to require you to blow. If he doesn't have that, he'll use implied consent to tell you, well, I'm arresting you anyway, so if you don't blow, you're going to have a year suspension. All right, and then after you do, he'll say, okay, on that year suspension, you get 30 days to appeal it, at which point you get an administrative hearing, for which point you can have a lawyer, at which point the state is supposed to have to show these elements of the offense. And guess what? Even if they do, you still have a right as an American citizen to go to court and have a judge review that administrative law judge's decision to determine if it complied with the law, okay? So there's a lot of opportunities and avenues there to challenge the basis of the suspension, versus just saying, well, y'all got me, so I might as well blow, that way I don't have an extra 9 months of license suspension, because then when you get to court and get convicted, that's part of your sentence. So just be aware of that on the back end. And so my advice is, if you've had any drinks at all, right, you shouldn't drive, just like I said before. They tell us, I had a call recently, you know, a graduation situation, over 21, who drank an amount that complies with what I was taught you could drink and drive, okay, responsibly, all right, like a beer an hour, a glass of wine an hour, shot an hour, right,
fact,
not drunk.
We had a point brought by Bilbo Crabbins, who said if you actually have a couple of drinks, you'd be fine to blow. He said most people can have 3 or 4 drinks and still be under .08.
You know, Bilbo could have been my high school driving ed instructor. What I'll tell Bilbo, and I don't know where Mr. Crabbins is from, in the state of Louisiana, okay, we got beautiful Blue Point crabs. We also have a presumption of innocence under the Constitution. At .05 blood alcohol content, you lose that presumption of innocence, because now there's no presumption in favor of you or the state. So I tell people .05 is really our legal limit, because that's when they strip you of your presumption of innocence, all right? .08 is a rebuttable presumption in favor of the state, okay? So, you know, and they taught me the same thing. But the problem is, well, what's a beer, Mr. Baggins or Crabbins, right? So you can drink look, I know a lot of people quit drinking Bud Light, all right? And I quit drinking Bud Light long before anything related to their social media accounts, all right? Because once upon a time, I drank, Pilsner, by the case, which now I hear is selling for $1 a pop. A case of Bud Light. Can you imagine in college if they were selling a case of Bud Light, even if it came with a dildo on it? I'd go buy all of them. I'd buy a refrigerator to stock with the free Bud Light. $1 a case, buddy. They up to $25 a case now. Okay, how the hell is nobody buying Bud Light at $1 a case? Where's the college students, right? Anyway, but a beer is not a beer. It's not a beer, okay? Because you can have some Mick Ultras in a 10-ounce can. Or you can have like a really stout beer, like what you were talking about, or drink like a high alcohol content beer, okay? Same thing with a shot. Well, what is a shot? I remember we used to take shots. They poured them in like tumblers, okay? Like, this is a lot more than points. What's a shot supposed to be, an ounce? Or
ounce and a half sometimes.
Ounce and a half. So it's a 6-ounce cup and it's full of something, you know what I mean? So, well, that's one shot. Let's do another one, Bilbo, right? I don't have to drive for another hour.
You're asking people to do chemistry of their own body and make that determination at the scene after they've been drinking all night to then make a determination.
Should I blow or not?
Should I blow or not? Well, I can tell you, most people who blow think that they're going to be under the limit or else they would not have blown.
I'd venture to say more than most.
Why
you blow?
Well, some people, I say most because I think some people they're ignorant to the fact that they have an opportunity.
Some people also so drunk they don't know what's going on, and they put that thing in their mouth and they blow .24. I've seen those. I know you've seen those. So
Absolutely,
they blew. But I just the whole thing is the license penalty. I understand it is onerous. I understand it's costly. I understand it's a great inconvenience. It's embarrassing. If you got a brand new car, you don't want them ripping up the dash to put in an interlock. Okay. It's really the least of your concerns as far as the overall outcome of the case. And you know as well as I do, if somebody doesn't provide video of field sobriety and they don't admit to drinking and they're not falling down and they didn't blow, that's a lot harder case for the state to prove. What evidence are they using, you see? Where's the evidence of impairment?
I have seen situations where people have refused everything and the cop ultimately says, call somebody to come pick you up. Now, I'm not saying that's every time, and I'm not saying that that's common, but I'm saying that the officer in that moment knows that he has no evidence to prove your guilt.
And without your consent, there's really nothing he can do beyond what he's attempted to do, So I tell people all the time, like, okay, you're going to do the field sobriety. Let's do it right here, and let's see if you can get the turn correct. I'll demonstrate the whole 9 steps, not just the 3 they're going to tell you. And I want to see you do it correctly. I want to see if you stand there with your hands at your side, with your heels together, listening the whole time. I want to see if you interrupt me to ask a question. I want to see if you make me repeat my instructions when I speak really, really quickly and give them to you. Okay? I want to see if you do that turn right. Because your chances are you're not doing that turn right unless you've practiced this thing before. And those are check marks on his form to indicate that he can now require you to blow. And if you don't, imply consent, you see. So don't drink and drive, man. It's so easy to not drink and drive now with Ubers, with the way people, But here, at least, the culture was always, I'm telling you, I was taught in a formal way. You can drink and drive safely, okay? And there's a lot of dudes who drank a lot and drove and never had any kind of unsafe incident occur.
Now, this was 25 years ago, in fairness.
I would have been taught this in...
You're 40 now.
Late 90s. Yeah, late 90s at 15. I was the last group to start driving at 15 before they went up to 16. Okay, so, but that's what they taught us. It was in the book. It was printed. You know what I mean? And I still remember it. And even at the time, it seemed like, first of all, I'm 15. Okay, well, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, you can drink, but no, you can't. Okay, but even after, it's the difference between being able to operate safely, which the legislature says under .08, you are not impaired by alcohol. Okay, so .07999999, you're good to drive. .08, now you're over, right? Well, how much alcohol difference is that? Or does anybody believe that discrepancy is where a person now cannot safely operate a vehicle? You can't draw a perfect arbitrary line. They had to pick something. I'm sure they had a lot of evidence to support that as a good number. My point is that to be safe to drive is a different thing to say I am safe from OWI prosecution if I drive. And what I want people to be aware of is just, don't drive if you're not safe from OWI prosecution, which if you drink at all, you're really just not, you know what I mean? And I know there's passage of time things, there's all this stuff. It's just, it's not standardized enough in everybody's body to be able to say confidently, certainly, I'm under 0.05, right? But 0.08. Just don't drink and drive. And it's hard to do in society, but
Benny,
it's easier now than ever.
Shifting gears a little bit, I want to hear your take on this. Weed is legal in a lot of states, and you can have weed in here with a prescription.
Medical card, that's right.
Why is it a bad thing to have weed in your car, whether your passenger is smoking it or whether you have it around, you can smell the aroma? Mm-hmm. Why is it bad to have that in your vehicle?
BC. What I've always said, the reason the police, the DA's associations would always be so opposed to any legalization of marijuana is the smell of marijuana, smoked and vegetative marijuana, get them into a lot of cars, okay? So that odor is probable cause for them to investigate further and probably search your car on the roadside. And if the cop's saying he smells it, he didn't even need a dog, If you have a card and you have your prescription marijuana, which can be actual flowered, bud, smokable marijuana in Louisiana, that's not a crime. But if you've smoked it in your car, then you're probably OWI, okay? So even if you have a medical card, whether it's marijuana or some other medicine, drug, if it's got a label that warns about driving or operating heavy equipment, you can be impaired by taking that medicine, and you can be OWI even if you haven't had anything to drink, okay?
And that provides the probable cause for the officer to search your car, even without a dog.
That's the smell of weed is PC to get in the car and search. That's right. So now, if you got your medical card and you flash it and he doesn't smell smoked marijuana, that probably ends it. I tell a lot of my clients it's like $150 to get a medical card, and then like there's so many crimes that you see that begin with the smell of marijuana. Okay, felons in possession, unauthorized use of movable, just all sorts of things that have nothing to do with marijuana.
It could be no insurance. It could be
nothing to do with marijuana. But the marijuana
tickets.
is the thing that got them in to investigate and find the crime. In houses too, by the way, not just cars. I've seen them do it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Carter had asked me a question last time about, like, what if it's something that's non-criminal, like you blow a stop sign right by your house, officer flashes, you pull in, you run in your house, right? Well, can he come in after you? Well, the simple question is yes, because he's got a badge and a gun, and what are you going to do, right? And should he? No. I mean, does he have grounds? Probably he'd argue there's some kind of flight or, resisting a lawful, arrest. It's not an arrest, but when it comes to like roadside encounters or real encounters with police, even if it's a police intrusion, okay, you can't fight it there. You see what I mean? You just kind of have to assert your rights, allow the police to do what they're going to do with whatever force they're going to use, because you can't use force to resist them, right? And, even the running, like very rarely, if ever, do I see an example where the flight from the officer doesn't result in much, it results in much more severe outcomes or criminal consequences than whatever they would have found had you not tried to flee. Does that make sense?
And the officer will definitely show up to court.
Oh, on a flight case?
On a flight case.
Yeah, he's coming on a flight case,
That possession of weed case.
Nobody cares about that.
Nobody cares about it. When you add the flight to it,
right,
officers coming.
The bond's going to be so high you might not be able to get out. It's aggravated times, a crime of violence. If it's an ag fight, you got to do like 2 of any number of things: blowing a stop sign, 20 over, leave the lane of traffic, have a crash. Yeah. If you're running from the cops, you pretty much always are going to have an ag flight in Louisiana if you go more than a block. Okay. On the smell of marijuana,
which is okay with me, because flight from an officer is a bad thing, and it leads to devastating consequences.
Yeah, what I mean is, what you have to realize, okay, if you have an encounter with police where it's becoming evident you're going to get arrested, okay, you just have to kind of take a deep breath and accept that that's going to happen, right? And to know that that's not the end of something. It might be the end of your plans for that day or the week, okay? But it's the start of the big thing that comes with an arrest, which is you being criminally charged. It's the very start, right? So don't mess it up at the start by trying to fight or flight. You know what I mean? It's hard to not, like, we are wired when we're in that situation to pick one, right? But we as civilians essentially have to submit to arrest, even if it's an intrusion and even if there's maybe excessive force being used against us, right? Like, you just can't, you're not lawfully justified to fight back. You know what I mean? I guess your best case scenario is you're getting a little tuffle and they really damage you bad, and then you might get some civil damages, right? But as far as the criminal case goes,
that's not a good consolation.
No, it's a terrible consolation prize, right? What would be better is if they got you, you comply with arrest, you invoke your right to remain silent, you request your attorney's presence before you answer any questions, and then you work the process.
You bring up a good point. Some of the questions we got on TikTok and YouTube, people were bringing up the point that if you brought up, hey, don't blow, don't do the field sobriety test, but the first thing you said was don't admit to anything.
Right.
And so some people brought up the fact that if you're completely silent with the cops, then that's the quick way to get yanked out of your car. You're going to get arrested for sure. I heard you talking about with the speeding ticket, how you actually talked to the cop and you were polite and you told him some things. Mm-hmm. So I guess, and that brings up with what Cole asked is, you told me all the things I shouldn't do. What should I do? What do you do?
Yeah, well, those circumstances are different because the question on the OWI is if you've had a couple drinks and you are of the mind that you're driving responsibly, having drank responsibly, because that's what we've been taught, okay? Under those circumstances, should you? The problem with, you can't just be a mute completely, but what are they looking for? They're looking for the smell of breath on your, smell of alcohol in your breath. So the more you talk, the more opportunity you give them to smell it. Slurred speech, okay? It's hard to slur the word no. Okay, so, where are you going? Nowhere. Where are you coming from? Nowhere, right? Stay away from your S's and your T's and your D's, especially if you're a coon ass, you're probably slurring anyway, right? Okay, so if you're in a foreign jurisdiction and you're talking like me, even if you're sober for a second, they might think you sipped a little, I don't know. But, so that's the distinction there, is if it's in the morning and it's not a suspected OWI stop, and it's just a traffic situation, officers treating it like a traffic situation, you are. If you stopped on a Saturday night going home, whether you were at a bar or a restaurant drinking or not, understand the officer is approaching that like a potential OWI situation.
You should have your handy-dandy Chaz Roberts Law glove box guide.
That's right.
Which includes your registration, insurance card, and even the card of a lawyer, and you hand it politely to the officer.
That's right.
Refuse the questions. Keep it short and simple. Give it to him. Thank you, officer. Am I free to leave?
That's right. And
no, you are not. We want to have you conduct some testing here. No, sir.
And it's. I wouldn't even say sir. I would just say no. Because it's not impolite to simply say no, and it's less of an opportunity to slur a word if you potentially have been drinking.
Sir, no, sir.
Yeah. No, thank you, sir. So anyway, it's just you make the officer make a decision, and his decision may still be to try to bring you in. But what you've done is you failed to provide him the evidence that is ultimately used against you in court, so that now they have to try to rely on whatever is there, which probably is not going to be much beyond whatever the officer can attest to. And it's a lot easier case to beat. It's a lot easier case to get an outcome that's not an OWI conviction. OWI is enhanceable, which means after you get 1, 2 is worse. After you get 2, 3 is a felony, okay? After you get 3, 4, 5, and whatever, you're talking about mandatory time in years, okay? Another thing I tell people is, okay, let's say you did drink responsibly and you're driving home, and somebody does something that puts them in your path to where you can't avoid it, and maybe you didn't even commit an infraction. And if somebody gets seriously hurt or died, and then, now they got to run your blood, mandatory. And then your blood comes back. You see? You may not have even caused that accident, all right? But you got some serious potential criminal consequences now because somebody else did something that was negligent, and you happen to be coming home from a place where you had a couple drinks, as you have been doing for maybe 50 years, responsibly, in your mind, right, having never had an encounter with law enforcement. It's just very risky.
The single most dangerous thing you can do in the human experience, right, that we all do, the single most
Getting that car every day.
dangerous thing that we do. Now, you are a special breed because you do gainers off of a bridge when we go tubing. You're a special guy. But most people is just getting in their vehicle to go to work, getting their vehicle to bring their kids to soccer practice. It is very dangerous because it's not only you, it's other people.
I don't know what the statistics are on doing gainers into the Comal, okay, but getting in that car statistically is dangerous every day, you know, and it's like, except for fentanyl, I think it's the most likely way I'm gonna die based on my demographic, right? So, and I'm not taking no fentanyl. So basically my car is my greatest risk to life, but how do you live without it?
Well,
And
I think the thing to do is understanding that risk is buy the safest car you can.
yeah,
Try to travel when other people are not traveling. You mentioned nighttime. I think driving at night is probably more risky, but I think what your point is to be on the road.
driving at night sucks, especially with LED headlights and xenons and all that stuff. Driving at night is hard on your eyes, you know, for extended time. Like it's not.
But
if
you're driving during rush hour traffic, there's more data points. There's more opportunity to get in a wreck.
that's
Because
right.
you're not able to get in those gaps like Benny likes.
Well, and then the phones, man. Like the phones. The cars get to where they almost completely avoid a crash for you. Okay. At the same time that drivers are the piece of technology they're operating primarily when they're behind the wheel sometimes is their phone. Okay. So one of them, if I throw it really, really hard at you, I might be able to gas you. Okay. If there's no protective cover on it. The other one, okay, you know, real easy to take out somebody's whole family in a blink of an eye. And so, and you feel so safe. You spend so much time in it. It's this nice, comfortable bubble. And, you know, people are so unaware of that, the power of that thing hurtling down the road.
I think the more technological advances we have with vehicles, like the stopping, warning of stuff, we start relying on those things, lane control, and so we're even more comfortable on our phones, take our eyes off even more. But the car doesn't drive itself yet.
Well, you know, Carter will probably agree with me, but the day is coming where they're going to use that public health emergency that's been in existence since cars are in existence of people dying on the road to basically say you can't drive your car no more. You know, because we have a better option now. And there'll be some additional things. Like imagine the fuel savings, okay, if you had autopiloted cars. Oh, everybody could get in their car and get home, especially with AI. Okay, the problem has probably been computing power. But if you could network everybody's car together, you get in your car, you get on your phone, what you want to do anyway when in your car, and then the car never actually comes to a complete stop until you get out of it. Because that's what would happen if you allowed an infinite artificial intelligence to drive everybody's cars like a hive, you see? And so the fuel savings would be probably to do all electric, you almost have to take the driver out of the equation because people waste so much energy every time you hit the brakes, bro, you just dumped a bunch of gas, you know? You didn't really, you dumped it when you sped up, but you got to do it again. You got to do it again. You know, you got a 7,500 pound car that you can put 7 of your favorite people in, and when you're on the interstate, you can get like 25 miles a gallon to it, as long as you're rolling. But every time you stop, you back down to 1 until you get back to speed. You know, 1, then 3, then 5. It's the stopping and going. It's the caterpillar. And the more cars there are, the worse the effect is, and the greater the magnitude of the waste because every single one of them is just burning. Think about the new fuel control of like stop idle, right? Where your car stops. When you're at a stop sign, your car's not running, your engine's not running, right? Well, I mean, how much fuel can that really save? Well, a lot if you spend a lot of time stopped, and there's a whole lot of cars that spend a lot of time stopped, you know? But that's nothing compared to the actual speeding back up. So imagine if you could never stop, if you never had to stop, right?
So how long are we away from that?
Oh, you got to ask Elon, man. I don't know. The rate of things, like the thing about AI
I'm just wondering how long I have left to practice personal injury law.
I wouldn't expect more than 15 or 20. There'll always be something, right? So the cars will malfunction. How many Teslas have crashed and killed people? You know what I mean? Like because of autopilot.
It's going to be something.
Right?
It's always
There's always going to be something. People will always be getting hurt, and there'll always be other people, you know, liable for it.
Benny, a guy is being interrogated by cops. They're doing the good cop, bad cop routine. They come in and say, so-and-so told me that you did it, and it didn't happen. Can cops lie to you in an interrogation?
Yes. They can. What you're talking about is a prisoner's dilemma. So you and another person are in different rooms, getting interrogated at the same time, and they're telling both of you, whoever talks first goes home, the other one goes away, right? And they're going to tell you that the other guy's talking, right? And they're going to tell the other guy you're talking. It's just a classic prisoner's dilemma, okay? And yes, lawfully, the police can lie to you about that kind of stuff. They can lie to you about the evidence they have. They can lie to you about what people have said, you know, all in an effort to induce your confession or even just induce a statement. Most of the time, people don't just outright confess. What they do is they attempt to explain away facts that indicate their guilt, okay? And, you know, when you're dealing with a detective who's questioning you about a crime, you have to understand that that guy does that all the time. That's all he does. It's what he does for a living, and he's good at it. Even if he plays dumb, even if he plays nice, his job is to try to collect evidence of guilt. And if he's talking to you, it's because he thinks you're guilty, right? And he's relying on everything inside of his intuition and his experience and the evidence he's seeing. And if he's convinced of that, you are not going to convince him otherwise in an interrogation. I don't believe so, okay? If maybe he's not convinced, you know, and I have actually seen some interviews that were not interrogations where people did give what I believe to be truthful accounts, and then they went home, okay? So it's not that that never happens, but most of the time, you know, if they're interrogating you, it's because they suspect you're guilty or you know something about some crime where somebody's guilty, and maybe you are. A mistake a lot of people make is they don't think that they're the primary person involved in a crime, and so by explaining the crime, including their role, they'll be basically released, all right? And a lot of times officers will promise that they're going to help them or they'll go easy on them or all that. You know, not to say the officer has no discretion at all in terms of influencing the ultimate prosecutor, the DA here in our state, you know, whatever lawyer is prosecuting it, but he can't really make you any assurances about the outcome. There's no way, because it's not ultimately up to him, okay? And the DA is going to be talking to the officer, but he's also going to be talking to other people like the victim, okay, or victim's family.
But when the cop has...
It's a broader consideration than just that.
But when the cop finds that nugget where you at least put yourself at the scene or affiliated with some way...
That's how it works.
Now the cop is he's roping you in. You're doing the action. He's roping you in, and then now you made yourself an even bigger target.
Well, what I was doing is he's peeling it back, okay? So it's almost like that's how most confessions take place. They're not voluntary confessions. They are, I admit to all of these elements of fact that may not even necessarily be elements of crime in an effort to explain why I did not do the crime, but in admitting to all of these elements of fact, I exclude any reasonable doubt of my guilt without ever really admitting that I did the crime, right? That's usually what happens, okay? And then the deeper people get in, the harder it is for them to explain the stuff that they've been saying, right? And so they go from having to explain what the officer had to begin with to now they're explaining what they've been trying to explain since. And he just keeps digging and digging and digging, and he lets you dig. And there's a lot of different tactics that you see used, and different officers have different styles, you know, but make no mistake, their job, if they suspect you of a crime, is to build evidence and then submit it to the prosecuting authority. Like, that's what they're doing.
And if you just say, I'm going to be silent, I'm not answering any questions, I want my lawyer, they have to find that information from somewhere else.
That's right. And they might, you know, but you'll get a chance to figure out whether it's credible.
But you didn't give it to them on a silver platter.
That's it. You see. And again, the mistake I see made that it's inexplicable to me. People are brought in, or they come in knowing they have a warrant, and they give a statement. They submit to interrogation voluntarily, waive all their rights in writing, and then speak. And then what ends up happening is it's not what they had at the time they arrested them that ends up being the thing that leads to their conviction or their likely conviction. It's what they said after they came in, and they did it because they thought they were going to get out. But if there's an arrest warrant, you're getting booked, man. You're getting booked. So anything you say, just like they tell you, anything you say can and will be used against you. That is literal. And most people, they think they can kind of talk their way out of it. Some people go in high, give a statement, high, trying to explain their way out of an armed robbery or a murder. You know, it's mind-boggling. When all they have to do is say, I want my lawyer present. Right? They don't even necessarily have to invoke their right to remain silent, which now you technically do have to invoke your right to remain silent, okay? Under Supreme Court jurisprudence, you have to say, I invoke my right to remain silent. But even if you just say, I want a lawyer before answering any questions, they're going to shut it down. If you invoke silence but then starts talking again, they can still use that. But once you say, I want my lawyer, that's it until your lawyer's there. And for the most part, they don't interview people further after that. The lawyers get involved. It goes to court. They submit what they have in evidence in their report. There's a charging decision made, and then it proceeds through the formal process,
What's the biggest misconception of what you do?
You mean like among clients or among the general public?
General public.
I think probably everybody bases their view of criminal law, unless they've been in it, on TV. And so they probably think that, somebody gets arrested and then the people involved in that arrest focus primarily on that. And then it comes to court and then those lawyers focus primarily on that. And then it gets sorted out pretty quickly. Okay. But the reality is it's not exactly like that. There are time delays in everything. Okay. So when you're arrested, you're going to be charged by the state. This is another misconception. People think victims press charges, and when you fill out a police report or complaint, you can indicate whether you want to press charges. But the determination to charge you is not up to the victim. It's up to the state. So the victim may indicate they want you to press charges, but the state may not, right? Because the evidence is not right or something. Or the victim, like in domestic cases, very common.
Victim says, I don't
want to press charges. He hit me, slapped me, kicked me. I think this tooth is the one he knocked out, but I don't want to press charges. Right?
When the cops come to the
And
house,
then-
somebody's getting in trouble.
Usually, and particularly if it's like they've been to the house before.
When the cops make an arrest, somebody's getting in trouble.
Yeah, if they're called on a domestic, they're almost always going to arrest somebody, okay? Or whoever's not there might get a warrant put out for them, right? And the officer under the law has a great deal of discretion in domestic cases, particularly about determining who's the aggressor, because a lot of them are combative situations, right, where there's fighting back and forth. And if the officer decides that this person started, he can arrest just the one that started. Okay?
And rarely is it a one-time thing.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll charge them both. Okay,
and a lot of times the cops know them by first name.
Yeah, because they've been there many times.
Many
right?
times.
And then before the person can even have probably a Gwynn's Law hearing, okay, the victim is wanting to drop charges, right?
Yeah.
And the state says no.
Because the reality of we have to bond out, we got to pay a lawyer, we got to Bobo's going to jail, that sets in. There's a cooling off period, and then they want to go their separate ways. But then they've created all this mess and paper trail, and then cops have to show up, and all these people got jobs to do, and then they want to pull back, right?
It's like one of the most intrusive areas of criminal law into people's families, okay, because it's as intrusive as anything.
It becomes a divorce proceeding or
well, it can automatically roll into a divorce proceeding, and there's some other things where sometimes these victims sort of get put in line to qualify for certain things where there's some perverse incentives there to sort of take the domestic abuse route to get ahead in line on certain things, okay? And that does happen, but what I'm saying is, if there was an area of the law that there was an attempt to figure out, to acknowledge, this, domestic offenses are really enhanceable. There's strict penalties, even on the misdemeanors, more than any other misdemeanor, I think, in terms of mandatory jail and all kind of requirements. They accelerate rapidly to felonies, mandatory jail.
We've seen that change in the last 10 years.
It doesn't seem to put a dent. You see what I mean? It doesn't, I don't know the numbers, but it doesn't seem to have it doesn't seem to deter the behavior, right? So, because so many people that do call police for domestic issues that then don't want them prosecuted at crimes, maybe there's some kind of other way to intervene to where it's not a police matter, where it's not a court matter.
We're all up for suggestions on that.
It feels like a huge portion of what everybody in the criminal justice system has to do.
You want to win the Nobel Prize right now?
Solve domestic violence?
Yeah.
Well, and then I was talking to the prosecutor that
ears.
handles the Gwynn's, okay, how you could never measure the cyclical impact, the generational impact. How many clients do I have that by the time they're a very young man, they've already made some decisions that, put them on a path where they're likely to end up in jail or dead, okay? Well, what if we go back 5 years or 10 years? What was that person's life like, you see? And so how much of what we see in adult or young adult behavior is a direct consequence of violence in homes?
I think when children see the cops show up to break up mom and dad, that has a lasting effect. And those children
Or how about the 10 times there's somebody gets their butt whipped and the cops don't come?
Yeah.
The 10 times a month. You see what I mean? What happens when violence is so ever present against, like, just imagine being a child and seeing your mom beat repeatedly, maybe by somebody who's supposed to be the person that you trust or supposed to take care for, like what, and then, okay, well, you're 17 now and we expect you to be fully formed and make really good decisions and have the same value set that we all hold based on the households we come out of. And so I just mean that, I just think if there was a way to address domestic violence, to not just make it about punishment, the potential to decrease crime overall, to decrease criminal activity, to decrease human suffering, to decrease dependency on government programs. That's the area where a lot of focus on drugs, right? And I'm not saying there's not a lot of opportunity there on drugs, but man, the domestic situations, the kids are the real victims in these. And then in a few years, they're going to be the people charged with crimes, right? Well, why are they so violent? Well, they saw their mama get beat up all the time and nothing ever happened.
As a former prosecutor, and I had to do some of those domestic violence cases, right? Benny was talking about, too, people wanting to drop the charges after the arrest has been made. And there were times as the state, I was representing the state, I had to say, we're not going to drop those charges. And part of it was to protect the future people, that this perpetrator may continue to do that if there's no repercussions, right? A lot of them find out ways, too, to convince their spouses to not bring those charges. They have lots of ways of manipulating somebody.
There's battered woman syndrome and all kinds of other things associated with that too, right?
Well, yeah, and people don't realize, like, there's a lot of elements that can elevate a person's first domestic offense to a felony. Okay, so strangulation is a very common one, right? That doesn't mean you have to choke somebody completely out. A lot of times what you'll see is what actually happened is a grabbing of the T-shirt near the neck, this deemed strangulation. That triggers a Gwynn's Law hearing, which means you immediately have a hold placed on you upon arrest, where the state can hold you like 5 days, and then they have a probable cause hearing to determine if bond should be ordered, whether a protective order is appropriate. They almost always grant a protective order, obviously. And in addition to strangulation, there's like burning, serious bodily injury, including unconsciousness, children being present at the residence, which can even mean like a fight happens outside but the kids are inside, or vice versa. If they're just present at the residence, if not, they don't have to technically be a witness to it.
I think
priors.
I think a misconception that I'm seeing in our several talks and just knowing you and being friends with you is you can represent people that have committed crimes or are accused of committing crimes, but you could also take a step back and say that's wrong, and it could be there's systematic problems. That person did wrong, and that person is probably going to end up paying some type of penalty, and I don't support what that person did.
Right, sure.
But I have a job to do defending that person, making sure that his constitutional rights are protected. And I'm an advocate and maybe even a counselor to that person, and try to guide that person in our dealings in the right way so he does not find himself on that side of the law again. I don't think people truly appreciate that part of what criminal defense lawyers do.
Right.
You are a brother, a cousin, a dad to some of these guys, right? You are a strong male figure that some of these people did not ever have in their life, and you're trying to guide them in the right way while having their back.
Yeah.
You might be the first person that ever had their back.
Yeah.
Right? I had a client tell me one time, I'm 30 years old, you're the first man that ever hugged me.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow.
That hit me hard.
Yeah.
So, man, this is a powerful conversation, dude. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know we ran over time, but I can't stop, you know? Benny, I'm not going to ask you where can we find you because I already know the answer.
Stay calm and call Chaz.
All right, man. Thank you, bro.
All right. Thanks, man.
Hey, it would mean the world to me if you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a 5-star review. It helps keep the show free, and it helps us book better guests to provide more valuable content to you. None of the opinions expressed by my guests are that of my own, and nothing we talked about creates an attorney-client relationship or could be construed as legal advice. Hope you enjoy the show.